Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad. Now, Pakistan says it will grant consular access to Indian spy Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav on Monday. In a tweet, the Foreign Office spokesman Mohammed Faisal said the decision has been taken in accordance with the ICJ ruling. Jadhav was arrested from Pakistan's southwestern Balochistan province in 2016. He was sentenced to death by a court on charges of espionage and terrorism. In July, the International Court of Justice rejected India's plea to acquit Jadhav of spying charges. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the world must see and speak out against India's fascism in occupied Kashmir. Addressing the 56th Convention of the Islamic Society of North America, Khan said India is following a Nazi ideology in Kashmir. Khan asked the forum to expose India's brutalities in the locked-down valley and call for action against its inhumane acts. He said the Western world needs to understand the RSS's extremist Hindutva ideology to clearly understand the Kashmir issue. Khan said Muslims and other minorities across India are being persecuted because of this fascist Hindutva ideology. He asked the forum to highlight Islam's true message of peace and tolerance to the West. Khan warned that India is planning to launch a false flag operation like Pulwama to divert the world's attention. The UN has asked India to ensure no one is left stateless after New Delhi revoked the citizenship of around 2 million Muslims yesterday. Expressing concern over the development, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said such policies will be a huge blow to the fight against statelessness. Meanwhile, the Indian government is facing a severe backlash over the list, including from within its own ranks. The ruling BJP's Assam President Ranjit Kumar Das has criticized the action, saying he does not trust the government. Now, US Senator and presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has said India's actions in occupied Kashmir are unacceptable. He was addressing the 56th Convention of the Islamic Society of North America in the US city of Houston. Sanders said the crackdown in Kashmir in the name of security violates local citizens' basic rights. He said the communications blockade in Jammu and Kashmir must be lifted immediately. Sanders called on Washington to support a UN-backed peaceful resolution that respects the will of the Kashmiri people.
India's action is unacceptable. The communications blockade must be lifted immediately.
Meanwhile, the Indian media says the situation in occupied Kashmir is slipping from India's hands despite the crushing curfew. In an opinion piece, the Indian Express wrote that reports of violence by the Indian military in the territory are increasing. The leading Indian newspaper asked the government how long the ongoing lockdown and communications blackout can be sustained. It said life in Kashmir is paralyzed, with markets, schools and public transport shut down. India's curfew and communications blackout in the valley has now entered its 28th day. In Yemen, the Saudi-led coalition's airstrikes killed more than 70 people in western Damar city. Houthi spokesperson Mohammed Abdul Salam said 50 others were wounded in the attack on a detention center. But the coalition says it targeted a rebel military position that stores drones and missiles. Rebel-run media says over 180 war prisoners were detained in the center and they were waiting for their release as part of a prisoner swap deal with the Yemeni government. In Afghanistan, security forces repulsed a Taliban attack on northern Baghlan province, killing 9 people and 5 insurgents. In a separate incident, a roadside bomb killed 8 people in the Chantal district of Balkh province. The Interior Ministry says security forces also cleared Taliban fighters of Kunduz a day after they attacked one of Afghanistan's largest cities. Meanwhile, US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said Washington and the Taliban are at the threshold of a peace agreement. He said the 9th round of talks with the group has concluded in Doha. The envoy said the deal would pave the way to a unified and sovereign Afghanistan that does not threaten the US or its allies. In Hong Kong, demonstrators have blocked routes to the territory's international airport after a chaotic night of clashes with the police. On Saturday, the security forces used tear gas, rubber bullets and water cannons to disperse crowds. Protest organizers have asked the public to overpower road and rail links to the airport to disrupt flights. The mass transit railway operator says trains to the airport have been suspended as protesters threatened to disrupt transport links. Police say 40 prominent activists were arrested during last night's clashes. Earlier, demonstrators lit fires, threw petrol bombs at riot police and attacked the Parliament building. Protests erupted in the Asian financial hub against a controversial extradition bill back in June. 5 people have been killed and 21 others wounded in a mass shooting in the U.S. state of Texas. Police said the suspect, identified as a white male in his 30s, was shot dead in a gun battle with officers. The Odessa City Police Chief, Michael Gerke, said the attacker shot motorists, shoppers and police officers during the car chase. Gerke said the gunman hijacked a postal van and police believe that the postal worker was among the victims. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said the FBI is already assisting local law enforcement in the investigation. The police chief has declined to comment on the motive of the shooting.
I just spoke to the president, and he's at Camp David, and he's closely monitoring the developments in the investigation in the mass shooting in Odessa. Our hearts go out to all the victims, families who had loved ones lose their lives.
Now, Iran has threatened France, saying it will scale back its nuclear deal commitments even further unless Europe fulfills its obligations. President Hassan Rouhani says the contents of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action are irreversible. In a telephone conversation, Rouhani asked French President Emmanuel Macron to commit to the JCPOA's articles. Macron expressed hopes of bringing Tehran and Washington together for talks. Tensions between the two countries spiked after the US unilaterally withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal last year. Iran has accused the US of engaging in piracy and threats to prevent it from selling oil. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo should stop nagging Iran. Foreign Minister Zarif says Iran will sell oil to all buyers. Earlier, Pompeo claimed that the recently released Iranian oil tanker is heading towards Syria. The US Treasury Department has blacklisted the tanker Adrian Darya and imposed sanctions on its captain. The vessel was seized by Gibraltar in July on suspicion of violating EU sanctions on Syria. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he intends to annex major parts of the occupied West Bank. Netanyahu had pledged the step in his election bid 5 months earlier, but did not give a time frame. Speaking in the West Bank settlement of El Qana, he vowed to extend Jewish sovereignty to all settlements as part of the State of Israel. Palestine has repeatedly voiced fears that Netanyahu will annex the region with possible backing from US President Donald Trump. Russia says the US airstrikes in Syria's Idlib de-escalation zone is a breach of previous agreements. US forces struck an al-Qaeda facility, killing 50 militants, hours after a Russian-backed ceasefire took hold. Russia's defense ministry says the US did not forewarn either Moscow or Ankara about the strikes. The ministry said Russian and Syrian warplanes have not carried out any raids in the region recently. Earlier, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the missile targeted militants' leaders at a meeting in a training camp. The al-Qaeda-linked Huras al-Din and their allies Ansar al-Tawhid are active in the region. In Turkey, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to launch an operation in northeast Syria if Turkish troops do not control a safe zone. Ankara and Washington agreed to set up a safe zone to minimize tensions between Turkey and US-backed Kurdish forces in Syria. An operations center has been set up and joint patrols are expected to start soon. Since last year, Erdogan has threatened to launch an assault against the YPG, which is an offshoot of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in Syria. Now, 5 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants have been killed by Turkey in a counter-terror operation in northern Iraq. The Turkish Defense Ministry says the airstrikes destroyed a weapons cache and shelters used by the PKK. The ministry says the air raids on Metina, Avasin Basyan and Gara regions were conducted in coordination with Operation Claw. It says Turkey will continue destroying weapon emplacements and shelters used by the terrorists. Ankara accuses the PKK of killing 40,000 people during the insurgency it launched in 1978. Now, Poland's President Andrzej Duda says Western sanctions against Russia over its annexation of Crimea should continue. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is visiting Poland to mark 80 years since the outbreak of World War II. President Duda said Ukraine should have closer relations with the European Union and NATO. The EU and the United States have imposed sanctions on Russia over its role in the Ukraine conflict. Meanwhile, U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry says Washington will continue to toughen sanctions on Russia. Perry was speaking in Warsaw after meeting Polish and Ukrainian lawmakers. And in Poland, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has asked for forgiveness for suffering inflicted on the Polish people by the Third Reich during World War II. At a ceremony in Warsaw, Poland marked 80 years since the Nazi invasion that unleashed the deadliest conflict in human history. US Vice President Mike Pence and German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier delivered speeches to honor the victims of World War II. Pence said America and Poland will continue to call on their allies to live up to the promises they have made to one another. Poland suffered some of the worst horrors of World War II, with nearly 6 million dying in the conflict. Pope Francis has been rescued by firefighters after he was stuck in an elevator for almost half an hour. The Pope apologized to the crowd at St. Peter's Square for arriving late to his weekly address. He explained that there was an electrical power problem in the Vatican which caused him to stay stuck. During his address, the Pope thanked the firefighters for rescuing him from the claustrophobic predicament. Now, Hurricane Dorian is slamming into the northwestern Bahamas as a catastrophic Category 5 storm. According to the U.S. National Hurricane Center, the storm is the strongest ever hurricane recorded in the area. Grand Bahama residents have been evacuated from its predicted path. Officials warn that the storm surge could be as high as 23 feet. Authorities closed some airports in the outlying islands, but the main international airport remains open till Sunday. After hitting the Bahamas, it should move closer to the Florida East Coast on late Monday. Firefighters continue to struggle to contain the Amazon wildfires. Not only do they face difficulty because of high temperatures and strong winds, firefighters and police trying to extinguish the blaze have also been shot at by loggers. More in this report.
There has been no rain in the Brazilian Amazon in 3 months. The dry conditions have led to the emergence of new fire points. As such, despite the firefighters' efforts, extinguished fires keep reappearing.
Though it's not been burnt, this piece of forest is likely to burn up because some smoke from fire could be seen in the distance and nobody is fighting with the fire there. The fire will soon spread here if no one goes to put it out, as the temperature is high and the wind is strong. It may burn this whole piece of forest together.
Natural conditions aren't the only problem. Officers on duty in the jungle also report being shot at by suspected loggers. The suspects got away, but the police were still able to destroy their equipment.
The joint operation between Ibama and the federal police found an illegal operation in the Altimara municipality in Para, in an area of about 2 hectares. Machinery was seized in this operation.
Illegal logging, farming and mining has despoiled nearly 12,000 square kilometers in the Amazon just this year. Wildfires in the rainforest have also surged by 83% since January. Critics of Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro blame his climate policies for encouraging the damage.
Sudan is going through a phase of transition after a landmark power-sharing deal between protesters and the military and the subsequent indictment of ex-President Omar al-Bashir on corruption charges. But young people have wasted no time exercising personal freedoms that were banned during Bashir's tenure. More in this report.
After the signing of a power-sharing deal between the military and civilian opposition, Sudanese citizens are ready for real change. Protests against Bashir and later the military council started because of the country's poor economic conditions. Later, they became about the right to exercise liberty. This was once a country where people were not even free to decide what their personal appearance should be like.
The truth is, during the former regime, people were not allowed to have their favorite haircut. People had to have a specific cut that was allowed at the time. If someone broke this rule, he could be beaten or insulted.
People with unconventional hair were not the only ones who had it hard under Umar al-Bashir. Even tea sellers had trouble doing business under the dictatorship.
Without this job, I would not be able to survive, feed my children, or pay their school fees. For a year and a half, I have been living in very difficult conditions after the former regime closed this place. I was evicted from my house, and my children and I were almost homeless.
But the country still has a long journey ahead. Sudan needs $8 billion in aid over the next 2 years to cover its import bill. Plus, 11 people who went missing during a military crackdown on protests in June still have not been accounted for. But whatever happens in the future, it's safe to say the Sudanese won't give up their hard-won freedoms without a fight.
Well, the concrete industry is one of the biggest environmental strains on the planet. According to the UN, between 40 and 50 billion tons of sand and gravel are extracted around the world for construction purposes yearly. This includes Cyprus, where quarries are putting the livelihood of local shepherds at risk. Take a look.
Jamal has roamed these slopes for years, but these mountains are no longer safe for him or his animals. Ever since the area has been taken over by quarries, vegetation has disappeared from the area and the air is thick with dust.
I have to run away from this place because I'm always in danger with every explosion. When I am unaware that the explosion is taking place, the rocks fall like rain on my animals and sometimes even on me. I'm getting injured.
Worldwide concrete consumption has tripled over the past 2 decades, with the global population expected to reach 2 billion by 2050. Demand is likely to rise further. Environmentalists warn this is a disaster in the making.
One day the quarries will end because there will be no more rocks, stones or mountains to dig up. What will we do then? We won't even have the time to ask the questions because everything will be gone. Measures need to be taken today.
Stakeholders in Cyprus' concrete industry have a different take on the matter.
Today the island is fed by tourism, so we need hotels, guest houses, roads and airports, so we don't have any other choice than to exploit the quarries.
On Cyprus's eastern coast, a 2,500-room hotel and several apartment buildings are popping up. Advertisements in English and Russian pitch the area as a place of happiness. Tourists may enjoy these apartments and hotel rooms in the summer, but they have cost Jamal, the shepherd, his lifelong home.
Fans of the augmented reality phone game Harry Potter Wizards Unite are enjoying their very first festival. Witches and wizards in attendance roam a park decorated with all things Harry Potter in Indianapolis. Let's take a look.
If you missed out on your Hogwarts letter as a child, don't worry, you can still become a wizard. Just report to Indianapolis White River State Park for the Harry Potter Wizards Unite Fan Festival.
All of our inspirations for the game really drive from the incredible body of work of J.K. Rowling. We spend most of our time when we should be working, reading, watching and just really soaking in the world. We wanted to make a kind of modern game for people today.
A calamity has overtaken the wizarding world. Thousands of witches and wizards from around the world have flew to the expensive park to avert disaster.
It's a great experience. It's a good community. Definitely a lot of fun just to get out and do something a little bit different. So, and really experience and immerse yourself. You become a wizard. It's what everybody wants when they watch the movies or read the books.
The golden snitch is not the only prize at stake. Wizards and witches use their vans or phones to discover never-before-seen oddities through the app.
It's constantly changing. So there's always different tasks and events to do, so it keeps you enticed. Versus other games where it can get a little mundane towards the end.
If players manage to return 150,000 dragons between them, a Global Day of Dragons event will unlock for September the 7th. The festival in Indiana runs from August the 31st to September 1st.
Welcome back, and first up in the world of business, China and the US have hit each other with fresh tariffs as the trade war between the world's top two economies worsens. This latest escalation comes even though the two countries hinted at the resumption of talks. Beijing levied up to 10% tariffs on over 1,500 items originating from the US. The new round of duties has hit Washington's crude oil. Meanwhile, the US has announced 15% tariffs on more than $125 billion of Chinese imports. This is the first phase of the US plan to place 15% duties on $300 billion of Chinese imports by the end of this year. Beijing has called on both sides to continue trade negotiations, saying it has ample resources to retaliate. Now, as the trade war between the world's top two economies worsens, it's difficult to say who is winning this battle. While the recent numbers out of Beijing suggest it's in front, Washington insists it's dealing heavy damage. Let's take a look.
President Donald Trump told the American people last month that the trade war was hurting China more than the US, but the recent data from the two countries suggests otherwise. A report saying Beijing's 6 major banks performed better than last year despite the economic gridlock with Washington. Shanghai Development Bank Vice President Wang Shenhao said operating revenue and profit both registered a 2-digit sharp increase. Bank of China Chief Risk Officer Liu Jiadong says the risk control of the Chinese banks has also enhanced.
For the key areas including real estate and industries with excess production capacity, we will keep screening the risks against them, make clear of the situation, follow up on the latest development, and diffuse the potential risks in advance.
Meanwhile, China Enterprise Confederation released the 2019 China Top 500 Enterprises list today. The enterprises in the list posted a record gross operation revenue of over $11 trillion, over $1.5 trillion more than last year. China Enterprise Confederation's Vice Chairman Zhen Hongren says the economy is undergoing major changes unseen in a century.
In the course of China's integration into the world, the Belt and Road Initiative has opened a very important path of internationalization for us. Through benign competition, we can jointly seek a development model leading to mutual benefit and a win-win outcome.
U.S. consumer sentiment in August registered the sharpest monthly decline in nearly 7 years. A University of Michigan report released this week said trade wars, tariff hikes have stirred worry, skepticism in the US. The index of consumer sentiment has dived nearly 9 points, the largest monthly decline since December 2012. While it is difficult to call the winner of this trade war, the World Bank and International Monetary Fund have already called the ultimate loser global economy.
Well, it's currently 27 degrees Celsius here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. As always, thanks for watching.